So, Phil, it's been a moment since we've had Matt on to discuss, the math of all this stuff, and with the ban announcement, giving us tons of data. I think it's time to invite Matt Chow back on to sort of kind of go over the numbers with us in the wake of the BNR. What do you think?
What an absolute banger of a title! Math with Matt is awesome. Matt Chow, welcome back to the pod.
Matt Chow.
Matt
Chow.
Oh yeah, of course.
Thank you all for having me. We had a absolutely gripping BNR update. Lots of things changed. We have a whole new format to explore.
Yeah,
you want to know?
It feels like we have a whole new format to explore. It does.
The thing that it changed the most was my outlook. I had so much hope going into this BNR, and I've had so much hope in the previous BNRs. And this time, all hope was stripped. And you know when you are amidst the chaos, and then eventually you're like, oh, I have no agency. And so you just embrace the fact that you don't have any agency, and suddenly you're just way happier. That's what this BNR was for me. And I'm so excited to get into the data now that I have this whole new positive lens on the world.
There's a similar thing, Phil, that cops talk about when they have somebody who's wanted for murder in the cell, and they haven't proved him yet, but generally the guy who actually did the murder just relaxes finally and goes to sleep, where everybody else is bugging out and freaking out, and that's where you are. You're I'm just gonna take a nap.
I'm just over here getting some rest, my guy.
Yeah. So Matt, fill us in. You've got some stuff to share with us. So fill us in on what's going on here.
So I've got just a little bit of information, not a lot to be fair. I really miss the days when WotC just gave us sort of the fire hose of all of the data. I loved that. That was sort of peak for me, being able to just look at all of these numbers and sort of try and draw conclusions. And things have really changed. So we get the top 8s from the challenges, and then we get essentially a small selection of cherry-picked 5-0 league results. But unlike when we had every 5-0 league result, because WotC is sort of selecting which ones they want to publish, I don't think that that's something that can be relied upon in any real way, shape, or form. Because it could be the kind of thing, if I were a bad actor working for WotC and I wanted to gaslight everyone into thinking the format was great, then if I had 15 reanimator decks that all won in a single day, and then I had one of each other sort of top 6 archetype, then I only need to publish one of the reanimator lists and then each of the other ones. And then that makes the format seem sort of at a glance that, hey, this is fine. Everything's great.
Working as intended, as they say.
Yeah, totally. Gaslight, gatekeep, gate crash. Something.
I think gate crash being the second set from the Return to Ravnica set. I think that's appropriate.
Yep. It was a real bummer after Return to Ravnica, let me say. So sort of in the aftermath of that, I haven't had a chance to really figure out a good way to isolate and pull all the data anymore. I had a system for pulling stuff from Eternal Weekends, which I was really happy with back in last fall. And I'm sure that I'll have one for this upcoming series of Eternal Weekends so that I can get that data up and out. But I think as of right now, the only real way to get good tournament data these days, outside of if you work for WotC, is to either do what Joe Dyer and the folks at MTG Goldfish, his group do, where they manually watch replays from every single challenge that they can get into. And I neither have the time nor honestly the cash on hand to enter every
willpower.
The willpower. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of data.
There's way too much there.
Yeah.
Or you can sort of try and manually scrape everything off of a site like melee.gg, which is what I have typically done. So sort of for sort of personal reasons, I've been working a lot on my house. That's probably why it's echoey in here, is because this is a room that I just finished and there's no furniture in here other than myself and my laptop and my tripod.
Don't worry, we have you on echo cancellation, so relatively low on the echo. Yeah.
That's good. But I've been working a lot on that. And so I think sort of given the time constraint and also given sort of how minimal of an update this was, especially given the conversation that you had with Max Dorshin yesterday or day before, whenever you had that conversation.
Link somewhere.
Link, yeah, here probably? Down there.
Down.
Is I pulled this event from, This event from St. Petersburg called the Legacy Open. And on Melee, it's just called 13th Legacy Championship, which seems pretty cool.
14.
So, 14th of them. A total of just 33 players. And so I think like looking at the Magic Online data is really different from looking at a paper metagame and sort
Agreed,
of like
yeah.
what that actually looks like and how these different decks are actually represented, right? And so I'm just doing one final thing with this spreadsheet that I probably could have finished earlier, but here we are. And let me see if I can share my screen real quick.
Please.
There we go, share screen. Oh no, I have to quit Riverside Studio in order to share my screen.
All right, well, come on back in 1 second. This episode of Eternal Durdles is sponsored by CardMill, the first automated scanner and sorter built specifically for trading card game players. With its intentionally compact design, CardMill uses AI-powered recognition to identify each card and sync inventory with real-time pricing, batching up to 300 cards at a time by name, set, color, or type. Collection data is securely stored in the CardMill network, giving players full access to their cards through an easy-to-use web portal. CardMill supports Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Flesh and Blood, Disney Lorcana, Star Wars Unlimited, and many more to come. Created by software engineer and longtime Magic the Gathering player Jonathan Dumanis, CardMill launches on July 22nd on Kickstarter with early bird pricing starting at $350. Backers receive lifetime access to all software updates and new features. Go to cardmill.com to learn more and reserve your path to the future of card sorting.
All right,
Awesome.
All right, and that is this one. Okay, so this is 33 person tournament from early in June. And so we've got Reanimator being roughly 10%, a little bit more than 10% of the field, and having a very high win rate. And I think this is what we would expect from sort of like an event like this, where the Reanimator deck is one of the best decks in the format, and so the sort of like best pilots will gravitate towards it. It is probably the best of the like pseudo fair sort of like archetypes, right? And so it crushed it with a 65% win rate. And then we've got sort of like the rest of the field. ENT being a highly played deck, it's affordable in paper, right? But it's also something that lots of folks will sort of like to play. And it had a really bad win rate. Breakfast doing pretty well there, 60-ish% win rate. And then Oops. And this, I think, is something that's interesting. So I know that there's a lot of discussion about Oops, but like, what do y'all think about sort of Oops looking at this win rate here and then its percentage of the field?
This is sort of what I expected after talking with Max Torsion, is that this deck shows up, does poorly. That 47% of people, their day was ruined. That's the way I look at it.
I agree that like I think it's just the sort of thing that even if it's not putting up winning percentages, that it sucks. It's just it just is. I don't think something that should exist. I think that like there should be the guardrail that like no deck should be able to make it so that you can't take game actions or have to warp your entire thing to like, you know, maybe a singular thing. Like, I don't know. I think people, if they're going to an event, they want to have some kind of agency, and I think that any strategy or card that like essentially obsoletes that just, you know, shouldn't exist in the format as like an accepted agreement across the community and WotC.
But I will agree, you know, 47% win rate is not the math to ban a deck.
No, something that really jumped out at me here was Mystic Forge. And so like I feel like Mystic Forge is one of those decks that has consistently overperformed like crazy in paper events. And I wonder sort of like if y'all have a take on Mystic Forge, because it's not really a presence on Magic Online these days anymore, is it?
I think Mystic Forge is the type of deck that nobody really thinks about as something to respect. But then it also has it has a ton of spells where if any single one of them resolves, the game just ends. Because they're like, you know, so snowballing impactful, whether it's Mystic Forge, One Ring, or Karn. And so but I think that like if it was at top of mind for people, I think that Mystic Forge is just continuously not considered in people's when they're building their 75 going into a tournament. It's just not something that they're thinking of in the same way that they're thinking about, you know, Dace Wasteland or Stompy, or, you know, the people are more thinking about like getting Blood Mooned out as opposed to getting, you know, Colorless 4 dropped out.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's weird. I have found, just like in personal experience, that Oops feels a lot easier to sort of like handle personally than something like Mystic Forge, because they're able to just like play that long game so well. And maybe that's just like a matchup differential where I think Phil and I are kind of on the same page, where we will often play decks that are blue and maybe too slow for the format. Whereas, like, Zach, if you're playing Reanimator or Breakfast, like, you probably are more likely to die to Oops than you are to something like Mystic Forge that takes some time to get set up. Does that sort of resonate?
Yeah, 100% does.
I think also like the times where I've noticed I have like I feel good sitting across from a Mystic Forge type deck, or like the colorless style big mana decks, are typically like just how much have I thought about it and boarded. Like if I'm on 4 consigns plus a clock post board, then I feel relatively you know well positioned. Same thing if you're playing, like when I played 4 Wasteland out of the board alongside consigns, and like the combination of those things to like just really go after exactly the two axes that they fight on, then because their cards are so much more expensive, that like you just sort of get to operate underneath. And so I found that like when you wanted to solve that, along with like null rods and stuff, when you wanted to solve that matchup, it felt relatively solvable.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's, yeah, you can beat anything if you want to, but it's the opportunity cost of including those sideboard cards or the sort of like the additional win conditions or that interaction in your main deck that
I think,
is sort of like where it becomes very difficult. Sorry, go on.
yeah, Mystic Forge is never on a high enough thing on people's radar. Like where I think if it was, there would be enough. There's enough reasonable hate within the format to keep that deck in check, because that deck operates at mono 4 drops sorcery speed. The only thing that's breaking that paradigm is a Kozilek's command. So the fact that like they can only really operate at sorcery speed and all of their stuff is chunky, that like you have the opportunity to actually you have a turn or two to take game actions to like continue that turn over and over and over again. And as long as you are able to like not give them forever, then it's a way that you can beat them. You have a couple of turns before you're slowly locked out, and like if either of the Mystic Forge or the Ring sits, like if you're playing some number of null rod, you're usually pretty good. So there are the tools to beat it. I think that like if it shows up and crushes, people aren't respecting it. I put it more in the dredge camp than in the like, oh, this deck is actually like way better than we think it is camp.
Yeah, that's true. The dredge analogy is like really interesting, especially when we're thinking about these sort of like new era reanimator and graveyard decks, because graveyard hate is not like what it used to be, where you were actually able to sideboard. And so that dynamic is I think the theme that we've been struggling with in Legacy for the last like 24 months, right? Is how are you combating these graveyard decks when they are able to so easily pivot off, or in the case of Oops, like fight through it so effectively.
Yeah, I think that the
Some else that I
alternative
thought was
side.
kind of interesting. Oh,
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, something interesting here is sort of like the split of the blue-red Delver and Cutter decks. So we've got, like, Is It Cutter and then also Teamer Delver somewhere in here. And those sort of, like, it's really split, where about half of these decks, or at least, like, half of folks seem to have split off. But it's just really, for the most part, looking at these shells, they look essentially the same with +4 Cutter, -4 Delver. That's
And their win rate is relatively
fine.
even. Yeah.
It's fine.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
It's wild to me, as much as I want like, volcanic islands and lightning bolt to be a thing, it's wild to me that people are even still trying it at this point, because it just seems like the incentives of the format are like, don't play lightning bolt. It's not worth it. I mean, that's the only reason I can think of, truthfully. Like, Corey Still Cutter is cute, but like, sure, it'll end the game in the long term, but like, you're really like not leaning into what a tempo deck is. And when you're like, hey, I'm gonna just play like the fairest version of a lightning bolt deck, right? it just seems like wild that those people, and this could be a card availability thing. You know, this is not a proxy tournament. Let's assume maybe they don't have underground seas, but not being on underground sea tempo at least seems like an incorrect choice at this point in time, just based off these numbers that we're looking at.
I mean, this will be.
Sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
Go on, Phil. No.
I was just quick aside that I think that like the black cards are so wildly and vastly superior to red cards at the moment that like playing exactly the same shell but with the red threats instead of the black threats is voluntarily handicapping.
Yeah.
There's nothing that keeps up in red with Entomb and Reanimate. Like the red doesn't have that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Corey Steelcutter has really impressed me for like the few matches that I've played with it. Like the card is really good, but the problem is just like, yeah, like you can amass a bunch of tokens and sort of lethal your opponent over the course of 3 turns, but it doesn't matter if your opponent has like essentially an OTK in the form of Balustrade Spy or Entomb Reanimate or Show and Tell Omni, something like that. It's interesting because this feels like a format for the last like 6-ish months at least, where combo is the best it's been sort of like in living memory, and sort of like we just keep trying to beat these various like hybrid fair combo decks and not being able to succeed.
Yeah, well, it also feels like, what are you doing if you're not putting a combo that ends the game in your deck, even if you're playing a fair deck, right? Like that's the whole point of like Cephalid Breakfast, as well as, you know, Show and Tell. Like you can play a fair game with Show and Tell if you want to try and like play like Murktides and stuff in the deck and do that, but like you're just gonna want to play Show and Tell eventually, right? Like you want to put Attrax into play. every deck is either ending the game immediately or putting Attrax into play and drawing an unfair number of cards and ending the game. So it's wild to me that people are still on the Volcanic Island decks when, you know, with Lightning Bolt. But that's paper, right? Like and this is a good example of like what Eternal Weekend could look like.
Yeah, and I mean even just like maybe to take a step back from like what the format as a whole looks like. Like this tournament, while, you know, sorry, I was wrong earlier when I said 30. It's 60 players. I was counting the number of lines, not the number of players. But like this doesn't look like a particularly like rough metagame. Like obviously Reanimator was there. We've got all sort of like the top-ish decks that you would expect, but there's a lot of other stuff here. And so yeah, sort of continuing off of what you were talking about with Maxtortion, like the sort of like online and modo-centric like viewpoint that a lot of us end up in, because that's like sort of where we spend the most time playing Legacy, can really blind us to the fact that like paper's not like that. And I think most of the fun that we have, or at least that I have playing Magic, is in paper, even if I play a lot of Magic online.
Well, I think that sort of exacerbates the issue, right? Like you're going to see people play D&T in paper because that's the persona that they have created for themselves in their community, right? Like you're not going to see the guy who plays D&T. He's not going to sleeve up Reanimator ever. That's never going to happen, right? And he's probably not going to play D&T online because there's no incentive, right? There's no social contract that makes that a good idea for him to do. He's just showing people online that he's very good at wasting money, right? Like, so when everyone's doing that, you know, but it's funny because there are, you know, you look at Commander is a great example. There are other reasons to play decks beyond like this is a good deck, but I think there is a little bit of that in Legacy where people say this deck is my persona and this is what I do. Like, you know, the D&T people, the 8-cast people, right? The guy at your local, we used to call him Golgari Vin, the guy who just plays the Rock. He's been playing Abrupt Decay for 12 years and you just can't get him to stop, right? So those people exist, right?
One of the beloved community members that we have here in Toronto has been playing Dead Guy Ale for fully like 15 years, maybe longer than that, and never plays anything other than Dead Guy Ale. And so like when it feels like whether or not he's having a good time is a good barometer of whether or not Legacy is healthy.
Yeah.
Because he will never play anything other than Dead Guy. And so like the more likely that he is to like continue playing out a tournament is for me, like a really good indicator of like, is this an enjoyable format right now? And I think the answer to that question, at least for him, is no, it's not a particularly enjoyable thing to be doing. I guess like looking at the D&T result, like Carbon was the one who wrote the BNRs, right? Clearly has like not, and I think that she'd said that we were aiming at creating like more of these like Aether Vial type decks, or like giving them more space. I wonder how successful that is. Looking at a larger sample size versus a smaller sample size like this one. Like this is tiny, right? This is 60 players, but is there anything other, like any other sort of like non-blue, non-combo decks that we're seeing really at all these days?
No, well, so every now and again, there's a cat at my local that plays what's it called, Cradle Control, and that deck has a ton of hate. If they can survive for 2 turns, they can generally stop the oops decks, what have you. But those decks so often win on turn 1 that I don't know what the guy's sideboard plan is for that situation. I don't play the deck, so I have no idea. I know that getting his deck plays Bajuka Bog, but like too late, in most scenarios, Hey, Legacy fans, since you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe to the video. It helps the channel grow.
Support Eternal Turtles on Patreon so we can create even more content and cover events.
Patreons get an ad-free RSS feed, 4 bonus episodes a month, and Discord recognition. Join the Dirtle Maniacs at patreon.com/eternaldurtles.
Now back to the show.
Yeah, I was gonna say lands is probably like another just like under the radar type thing that like does have plenty of game against this type of stuff, between like Caracas to bounce Tamios and Atraxas after they've touched down without actually having to spend mana to use the stack. They do have access to Graveyard Hate between Crop Rotation and Bajuka Bog, and then they can either copy that with the Cave that comes in by wasting their own thing, or like they have outs to like recoup that stuff. Plus, I think they play some number of Endurance across their 75, so like Lands has a bit more
I think
game.
they play like 4, yeah.
Yeah, like because they kind of have to, right? But like between Endurance and Crop Rot, and then the access to like Urza Saga beatdowns, like essentially they can avoid the stack pretty much for the things that matter. And then I was talking to some guys at the local where they were like, yeah, also like your Urza Saga package can also just be shifted around, where they were talking about how like Lance players will main deck Grafdigger's Cage just to be able to find it off their Saga for a certain metagame. Instead of a Soul Guide Lantern, they'll just get the Grafdigger's Cage, so they can like end step Crop Rot, get the thing, untap, whatever, and then find the Grafdigger's Cage faster. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, I don't think that it's like, if players are there was a time in Legacy where people would go, it is correct to main deck Pyroblast. Isn't that a sign that things are bad and we need to fix something? And if like we're in the conversation where it's like, yeah, you should main deck Leyline of the Voids, or you should main deck Grafdigger's Cage, even if you can get as but like once you get into like hard hate, like, hey, we need some hard hate for the format, then it probably needs some amount of correcting, right? Like the Soul Guide Lantern is like, and the Nile Spellbombs, like those are the freebies, right? Like those cantrip, those are the incidentals. Whereas like it's like a nod to graveyards, but it's not like, oh, this is a struggling metagame. Whereas like once you get into the hard hate, like, okay, that should be an alarm bell.
Yeah, I really do sort of like I do like the like one of Nihil Spellbomb kind of a deal. Like I think that's the kind of thing that is probably fine even in like a healthy-ish metagame, because it's so free. Like that's not really like something that feels particularly bad. Like, if you were to play it in like Grixis Mirror or something like that, or a Dimir Mirror, that card has some utility against opposing Nethergoyfs and that kind of thing. But when you start talking about main decking something like a Grafdigger's Cage, that feels like a very different kind of a threshold in terms of this is blank in 30-40% of matchups, and then is a hate piece that I have to find in some other percentage, and that does seem a little bit dicey to me.
So Matt, it seems like what you're putting forward here, and don't let me put words in your mouth here, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the paper metagame is telling a much different story than the online metagame.
Yeah, I think that is always the case, right? On Magic Online, we always have the ability to sort of like very easily and low friction, in a very low friction way, change decks. Like a really good example of this is like I own enough physical paper Magic cards that I can play a like reasonable version of like a bunch of different sort of blue fair-ish decks. But if I wanted to play something like Doomsday, I don't have enough Underground Seas to be able to just like do that, and I don't have an LED to be able to just do that. And for something like Oops, nothing that I have overlaps with any of those cards in paper. And so what that means in reality is that I have to really think about like what is it that I'm going to play of the available card pool that I have at my disposal, whether that's like stuff that I own or that I can borrow. And then on Magic Online, like, I mean, I think you guys both have like the Daybreak accounts, right? But for me, it's like, you know, I just have what I've got, but it's really still very straightforward. And if I decide that I'm done playing a deck, like I flip it to some bots and I get a new deck and I'm good to go, which means that I ended up playing Reanimator a lot during that period in time when Frog was legal, because it was so easy and frictionless to just like have whatever the latest list was and to be able to like continue to iterate on that. Whereas sort of like, or to be able to like fully switch out to something else. Like I at one point on Magic Online picked up like stuff to play. Oh my god, I can't remember what it was now, but it was like a stompy deck or sort of like the like. I think it was like one of those like Rakdos stompy lists. And it was just like, that was like an afternoon and I spewed some value and I probably shouldn't have, but you know, we're here now. And that's just the kind of thing, like you can so easily play whatever it is that you want online, which means that you are more likely going to want to play a good deck that you're able to win with, because you don't have that sort of social lubricant of hanging.
Yeah, there's no incentive, right?
Yeah. Right. Like when you're playing online, the goal is to win. You're not there to engage with your potentially really toxic Magic Online opponent.
I will say, I've had nothing, one or two people aside, I've had nothing but good interactions with people on Magic Online. Either knowing who we are and being like, hey, is this going to be on the show? You know, that sort of stuff, which is awesome. And then the occasional person that like is just like, what are you doing? Like when I'm playing, because I play pre-modern a lot, and they're just like, what is happening right now, right? Like, but that's the funny thing actually with the taking an aside here with the pre-modern thing is there's no incentive to stick around once you're not having a good time, right? Like you don't win anything. You're playing in free form, basically, right? And I rarely have anyone who just loses like, I'm going to get out of the match immediately. Like, I just don't want to be doing this against your, like, brew, because whenever I do that or did that on Legacy, if I played something weird in Legacy in the, like, free 1v1 thing, as soon as they saw I wasn't playing a tier deck, out. Right? I put a Tundra or a Taiga into play, and they're like, nope, I'm not doing this. Like, whatever this guy's doing, I'm out of here. Whereas you occasionally do, like, in other formats, there is a bit of a social contract in Magic Online, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that social piece is a really important part of the game. They call it the gathering for something, right? But it's what makes the game enjoyable. And I've been playing a lot more Arena recently, like playing Timeless on Arena, just because that's what I've had sort of time to do, is I can commit to playing a couple games of Timeless. Man, Corey Steelcutter feels great in Timeless, full aside. And Oops feels so much worse in that format. Like, unbelievably miserable to play against compared to Legacy. Like in Legacy, you've got Force of Will and you've got Force of Negation. And in Timeless, there is no free permission, but they still get to play Pact, which is just disgusting. Like it is the grossest thing. There's no, like, absolutely horrific. Like, I have no interaction and you have all the interaction. But anyways, fully lost my train of thought. The sort of like speed at which people will scoop it up on Arena compared to Magic Online compared to paper is like, you might scoop twice as quickly on Magic Online as you would in paper, and then it's like even twice again on Arena.
Yeah, on Arena, you're just like, okay, it looks like I've lost this. I have to jam as many possible matches as possible, and I'm out.
I have some of my experience is a little bit different as the guy who wants to play the everlasting control deck, whereas in paper, players will not always. Some players are the diehards, but players in paper will scoop a lot more than online. Even like I can demonstrate that I have the lock. I know that they're never resolving a spell for the rest of the thing. I'll like say in the chat, I'll be like, "Hey, you're like demonstrably locked. Like, can we go to the next one?" They just won't respond, and they will just play for clock. They'll play for clock. And I'm like, I don't know what either of us are learning about here, or if you are enjoying this, but like, I'm happy to like lose on time because that means that I'm just winning for the entirety of the time that I'm playing the game. But like, I don't think either of us are enjoying this part of it anymore, because I know that you have
that value.
malintent. I know you have malintent, and I'm over here being like, I'm doing exactly what I came here to do. So, like, do you want to watch me jerk off? Like, this is weird, right? You want to go to the next round.
Is this show safe for kids?
No,
No,
no.
no.
I'm drinking a beer already.
I think the time clock, like the chess clock versus paper clock, is another sort of factor here. Where I think that exacerbates the oops all spells problem, where on Magic Online, you finish your match, and that means you get to jump directly into another match, unless you're playing in a challenge. And in paper, if you finish your match in 10 minutes, then you have to hang out for 40, 45 minutes waiting for other people to finish their matches, right? And that probably contributes to the fact that we see it less, even though it's a really like budget-friendly paper deck by comparison to something that's playing multiple copies of Underground Sea. And so I wonder if that sort of like plays into the sort of like data that WotC is using when they're sort of like balancing this like data vibe sort of like combination where and sort of like how are they valuing paper versus Magic Online, right?
Yeah, in paper, if you're looking to spike and you think that you can do that with like a whatever version of Oops you got is, but like if you go, it's like, okay, whatever your commute time is to get to the event, and then it's like, okay, over the course of the weekend event that you're playing in, your cumulative time actually playing Magic is like an hour. And it's like, okay, so you traveled, and then the actual time that you're playing the game that you went to travel to play is, 2% of your weekend. That is the point of the weekend. And that also like probably skews people away from it. Unless they are just like, I'm here to win it and I don't care about anything else. And I think that this is the best way to do it.
I think that actually like really picks up on something where like Oops is miserable for your opponents to play against on Magic Online, but it's more miserable to play in paper for most people because of that exact dichotomy. And I wonder, like, that's another piece of this balancing puzzle that like, yeah, like they use the same ban list, but sort of the incentives and like how we think about these games kind of different.
This is a point I was
online, right?
Running to, yeah. This is the point I was running to, was like, is the incentives for Arena and Magic Online are so vastly different from playing at like, say, Eternal Weekend, where like you're part of the community and like you're kind of there partially for bragging rights. Of course, like who doesn't want to win, $1,000 card if you make the top 8 or whatever. Of course, all that's good, but most people don't, and they're there to have a good time. And I mean, is that sort of a indictment on the deck if like people aren't playing it in real life? Should it exist on Magic Online? That's like a whole nother situation to talk about. But yeah, it's interesting to think about like what the incentives are playing online versus the incentives are playing, and then you have to worry about like, why are people defending this deck if they won't show up to a actual Magic tournament with it? Because there are people out there that are like, we think this is great, and there are incentives to a deck having no reserve list cards, being relatively cheap to get into play, having a low bar to be able to win with. All those are ostensibly good things to get people into the format, but when the play experience is so miserable that no one wants to do it in paper, and opposite wise, everyone hates you online, like then I don't know, like can't you figure out another way to get people into the format without making it miserable for at least one of the two people playing the game?
I mean, does this come down to, is fun zero sum?
Yeah, I mean,
and like there are certainly folks who think that fun is zero sum, right? Like, am I playing mud, right?
Yeah.
I would argue
Stasis is one of those situations, right?
Or
like
Stasis,
if I'm playing
yeah.
Stasis,
I would assume the position that there's enough problems in Legacy that it's tough to think that that fun is anything but zero sum. But then when you go to a format that isn't festered and rotten for the most part, like Zach commented on pre-modern before, it's like pre-modern, the fun is every round. Like they're like, even with there are power outliers, but they're in a context that even though there are power outliers, they aren't without ways to maneuver. And like our buddy Higby, who's given us a couple of donation deck lists for our channel so far, was just like, yeah, there's breadth to brew. And so like you can actually come up with new ideas that you can actually explore because the format isn't so punishing to the most powerful stuff that you'll actually get to implement ideas to see if they can work. Whereas like Legacy just does not allow for that. And so like it sort of feels like, yeah, if you are going and sitting down at Legacy, like if at any point your opponent is having fun, it probably means because the game is snowballed out of your range.
Matt, this was a secret episode to get you more indoctrinated into pre-modern, by the way.
All right, where do folks play pre-modern? Is it just like there's a Discord and you like?
There is a Discord,
Is that like,
so that's one way to do it. So if you
because I
want to
know
play
you're
online,
in, so plug the Discord.
Yeah, so I'll link the Discord below for sure. But if you want to play online, what you do, so this for anybody who's curious, right? Build your deck, and then you go into the freeform, and then you go to best 2 out of 3, and then you just look for people that are like pre-modern, right? And for the most part, like it's a pretty open community. People are just like, and there's always games. Like if you write in create pre-modern and hit, like within 2 or 3 minutes, you're gonna get somebody that's like, yep, I'm into play. So it's a good spot for that. Maybe Magic Online will start supporting the format more formally at some point. But right now, honestly, it works pretty nicely. And as far as content creation is concerned, like it's free to play. So that's kind of great, not complaining about that,
Like I live in a city with I live in Toronto with like a ton of Legacy communities, but also particularly spiky Legacy players. And so my locals is actually like much more representative of Magic Online than I would imagine most like FNMs are. Is that sort of the case for y'all as well?
Yeah, I think for New York, it definitely, well, maybe not now, but when I played in New York 5 years ago, that was how I sort of saw it. It was like everyone, like it's a murderer's row of killers. But now apparently Phil's saying it's not.
No. I'm saying that it's not the, bring your casual brew. Like some people will come up with some people will, every once in a while show up with like something like a fun idea that they've just wanted to do. And they know that they get to do it because, they play every week. But for the most part, it's like, no, these are people playing, top tier decks, tuning it, trying to figure out what the best thing is for the next big event that they're going to. Like you are unlikely to run into, like if you do run into a brew, it's either somebody's first time or they're like, they are making it known that they like just wanted to have fun with a joke.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like you're only running into bangers every round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was my experience.
I wonder, like, if you're watching this and you have a different experience, like, please, I would love to sort of like find out what these local play experiences around the world are. Because I certainly only have the experience of like when Frog and Reanimator were the best decks, like I was playing Frog in paper, and so was everyone else at FNM.
Yeah.
And so we would have 20 of 30 people playing Dimir Reanimator, and we would just play mirrors all night for 4 rounds. And I'm curious if that is more or less representative of what paper is like, because there's just so little paper data out there that like, even though WotC's not providing us with, honestly, like as much data as we'd love to have, or to be able to like even comment on format health, right? Like, I think that that's really where I'm at right now is like, there is not enough format data for me to like say, or even just like to make an argument like this looks good or this looks bad. It's kind of just like, we got to just take WotC kind of at their word and like believe
I think
them.
that like taking WotC at their word is like all of their behavior and action, I think like makes it feel like not that we can't do that. And then also just the notion that they're like, we have all the data and we're just going to choose to not share it with you because otherwise people solve it too fast. And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I think it could go the other way where it's just like, oh, if you showed us all the data and then there was something like underneath that was just like, oh, this is actually really good. Like you pulled up Mystic Forge, and I think that like Mystic Forge is just like the type of thing where, when people want to beat it, they can beat it. But like, I don't know, maybe there's like data where there's like a couple of players playing like, the off the beaten path thing that never gets the light shown on it, but like it's just beating up on the top decks. But like we would never know because we don't see that stuff. And like maybe it's just like I think there's so many pockets in Legacy that like maybe somebody has figured it out, and it's like a way that it loses to everything except the stuff that they always run into at the top of the metagame. Like, who knows? I actually think that like the format is, I think we're restricting the data because we don't want it to be solved so fast. I think it's the other way around, or I would like to explore it with the other way around. It's like, would the format actually be healthier if we were seeing more data and then people were using that to inform a bit more choices, and that would actually create a little bit more churn?
Or would it give decks that like people aren't actually playing that often breathing room? Like if we saw that like Oops All Spells was only like a true 4% of the meta or something like that, we'd be like, oh, okay, like I don't have to commit like all of these sideboard cards. It's just anecdotal. People are, that sort of thing. So I think that would be of interest. But again, they're not going to do that.
No, totally. This actually really reminds me of the sort of like evolution of Demir Reanimator. So I have this like a deep dive video that I keep putting off because Demir Reanimator continues to exist, and so I've been like, here's the every like 3 months I like rewrite and re-record my entire script, which is now like got to be like an hour and a half long, and I'm like, here's the complete history of Demir Reanimator, and they fully killed it this time, and then I wait a month and it's still here.
Yeah.
You know,
So,
honestly,
like-
that can be the bit of the video. You keep saying it dies, and then like, you know, jump cut
Like-
to it's back atop.
You just do another one. Yeah.
No, for real though. Like I first wrote this like before I think Frog got added to the format, and I was like, so here's the grief scam version of this deck, and you know they'll hit grief and it'll go away, and then Frog got printed, and then like Frog got banned, and it was still good, and then like. But what I was trying to say is like, so I actually found what I think is the first ever Demir Reanimator list, and of the like sort of tempo grief scam version, and it was from like 3 or 4 months before it took off in December of 2024, I think it was. Yeah, so it was like 2023, and so it was like after Troll got printed. But it was like 2 months after Troll got printed, and it was from like this random paper tournament in like mainland China, and somebody had a deck list that was so close to what that deck ended up becoming, but because it wasn't part of a Magic Online dump, because it didn't get scraped into any of these other, I found it by looking at MTG top 8 lists from all time, and it took 4 months for this deck that was really good and like did well at this tournament to then actually see play. And that I think was really interesting. And that's actually like a really good argument, I think, for keeping that data sort of like more under wraps, is that I mean, like it's a double-edged sword, right? Where you end up with folks who are just copy and pasting lists every single day, but then you also have the innovation is slower, right? When people are not doing their own innovation, there isn't the ability to break stuff, but then there also isn't as much of the ability for the format to sort of like self-correct. And so I have no idea what sort of like the solve is or how I would try and approach that. But it was really interesting to sort of like see that example where like this deck, somebody brewed it, somebody did well at a tournament, and then it took another 4 months before it actually like took off.
I think our lone hero, as per usual, has got to be what, Zach? Orcish Lumberjack, am I right?
Orcish Lumberjack dies to Orcish Bowmasters.
No.
I will say as like sort of a final note to put a pin in my nonsensical rants about pre-modern is that those same spikes in our New York meta are the same guys that are finding so much joy in pre-modern, because those same guys, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, those are all the same guys that are like going to the big pre-modern events and having so much fun in pre-modern. That might be the end for you in Toronto, is to be like, hey, this format allows you to play like several different decks, and it doesn't cost that much to get into, you know, like. So I think that could be a.
The best way that I've heard it described is our buddy Adam, when it comes to, he was a legacy guy with us, but then, you know, sort of became disenchanted with the format because of how snowbally it became and like how much less agency it felt like you had game to game. But then I was convincing him for a while. I was like, dude, you would love pre-modern, man. Give pre-modern a shot. And he was like, there's no way I'm doing that. Like, I'm not playing a fixed format, like blah, 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 blah. And now he loves it. Like, now he wants to travel to all of the pre-modern events, and it's awesome because like he's an exceptional player and he's like a really intuitive mind for that type of stuff. And the way he described legacy versus pre-modern is he's like, the legacy games, the stuff that matters is like the top 10 to 12 cards of your deck. Like what the top 10 to 12 cards of your deck determine the outcome of game. But then he's like, in pre-modern, it's like the top 20 to 24 cards. And so like the depth of each game and the choices that you make game to game are really what, like, it seems like when everybody wants to correct a legacy, what they're actually striving for is they want more than the top 10 cards of the game of their deck to mean something. And pre-modern is just like the closest thing available, like readily available with a lot of communities that give that sort of feel without it being just the same cards in a diet version, like going to modern or, you know, one of the younger formats.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Sounds fun. Yeah. Go on, Zach.
I was just going to close the episode. With that said, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on and kind of giving us sort of a grounding as far as what we're seeing online versus what we're seeing in paper, and it's always fun to have you on, man.
Yeah, thanks to you guys for having me. I'm sorry I didn't have like a little bit more data for today. Hey, WotC, give us more data, please. Would love more data. Even, you know what? even just like after you make a BNR update, if WotC can give us like some of the data from the previous format, I think that would go a long way to sort of like instilling that sense of trust and transparency, because I do understand where a lot of folks are coming from with this sort of like feeling of, we don't feel like WotC knows what they're doing because we don't have any sort of way of knowing for sure. So yeah, give us more data, please, just so that I can, look at it.
All right, and with that said, thank you everybody for watching, and we will catch you on the flip. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button. It grows the legacy content ecosystem we all love by relaying to the platform that you are part of our passionate community.
And to go even further, click the links for subscription or to support directly via Patreon to help us create more content for you. Patreon supporters get 4 exclusive extra episodes per month. If you're listening on an audio platform, head over to patreon.com/eternaldurdles.
Thanks so much for your support.
We'll see you in the next one.